Season
All right, let's try to get started. So folks want to take a seat. We've got around the sides here. Very coming to take a seat. You want to get started?
Yeah. That'll work for us.
Good, how are you? What'd you think of this?
All right.
Let's get started.
Sorry.
Are we applauding you, Patrick?
No, I'm applauding you to sit down.
Come on, Murphy. We're busy.
Okay.
You know, the riverbanks here, we try to come to us in Connecticut.
Welcome everybody to the spring meeting of the CCC. Let me do a quick review of the agenda, and we've got copies there, and I think some copies on the back table with the chairs for others, and we'll dive in. So we'll do the preliminaries as we often do. We'll give Tim a chance to talk from the TAG grant, and you kind of update from the TAG grant recipient. We've got some updates on Rest of River regarding the EAB proceedings, submittals, and some other things. So Dean and Tim will cover those things, I believe. Then we want to do a quick update on some of the cleanups outside of Rest of River. So Dean will cover those. And then, as you all know, we did the CCC process review, so we're going to sort of feedback you, quote unquote, the things that we heard from folks and walk through that with you all. You all have got the draft report. We've got slides to kind of help us walk through that. Some general updates, including the Connecticut meeting in June, and then we'll wrap up. Any quick questions on the agenda? All right, meeting summary went out. That's right, from last meeting. Okay, so I don't know if people remember this one, but any recommended changes, suggestions, edits to the meeting summary from
Probably working.
Okay. Tim, over to you.
Yes. Not too much new to report. I just wanted to bring up the fact that we had a discussion with, well, some of you may not know, I know most of the people were there, that we had a meeting with the new administrator from the EPA. And it was brought up again at that meeting that we have to remember that, that the dumps that are proposed in the 3 towns, if GE ends up being successful in getting a judge to overrule the EPA plan or whatever, how it may work, to win on appeal, that GE certainly thinks that those judges will contain high-level material, which is something to be very concerned about. Even though most of the Rest of River has lower-level material, there's still some hot pockets in there, and so these dumps might end up being high-level dumps. And high-level dumps means anything over 50 parts per million. So it's not good for your neighborhood, like if you live in Lenoxdale or if you live in Housatonic, or if you live up near Goose Pond, our cleanest body in Massachusetts, where one of the other dumps is going to go. So we're a little worried about that. And I just would like to also say that HRI had a board meeting a week or 2 ago, and if I'm allowed to say it, Barbara Cianfrini, Lynn Fowler, and Sage Radikowski, who couldn't come tonight, have all been elected to the HRI board, with the possibility there's still one outlying person that we haven't made touch totally with about it. So it's some of the old troops joining up with the old troops, and some new troops joining with the old troops. So.
Thank you. Yes, Ben.
Could, Tim, even though I know the answer, I think it would be helpful if you could explain why the judges are, or under what's the nuanced difference that would allow the judges to, or GE to successfully petition to dump high-level material in those dumps. And it had to do with CERCLA versus, RECRA, if you could explain that.
Well, the way that could happen, obviously, is that GE has the right to appeal the permit still in federal court. Let's say the mediation that has been proposed fails, nothing works there, and it does go into federal court, certainly if you read the GE briefs, you know that they will be arguing before the court that they should be allowed to dump in one of these 3 dumps. And as I said at the last CCC meeting, there are other properties that we've seen GE buying up in Berkshire County. One of them that we have our eye on is called the Butler Farm, which is right next to the Fish and Wildlife up by East and Lenox Road there. It goes right along the river and matches up to Eastover. And there are a lot of people that have said that Eastover potentially could be at least a staging site. What allows them to do this is that they can appeal in federal court to allow the dumps there. And at the meeting the other night, there's been this idea that maybe low-level materials would go in the dumps, but what about high-level materials? And I think it was, maybe Dean can, because Dean, I think, explained it to us the other night, that it's indeed, in fact, if GE could, gets the okay to put dumps in there, that the judge could easily say high-level dumps are appropriate there.
All I would say is that that's what GE proposed in their appeal, that that EPA's decision allow for an on-site disposal facility that would take both material above and below 50 parts per million PCB. So that's their position as to what the permit should say.
Yeah, I wanted to get some clarity on something. That is, say the dump does go in and the EPA is overseeing it. At what point and then we've got this dump, at what point do we become a dump for the next GE mess that's getting cleaned up in another state? Because we're now an official dump.
As far as I know, if GE prevails with the argument they made right now, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, it would be just for this permit. And only waste generated under this permit could go into that facility. That's the argument they're making now. Could that be expanded? I would think not, but I defer to Tim on that, because it's not an officially licensed PCB dump. It's approved for it would be approved for this project.
Tim, do you want to add to that, and then I'll go to Dennis?
Yeah, I agree with Dean. That what they're arguing for right now is for the waste that's under this permit. That would go in the dump. But I don't have anything. I don't really know what would be the decision-making process if they later said we want to add more waste to that.
Especially with a high-level waste facility, that would be very enticing to another community that was fighting that. Thank you.
Good question. Dennis?
Probably, I think a question for EPA. Does the licensed site charge more depending on the percentage of PCBs in it or the toxicity of it?
For an off-site licensed facility, they do charge, if it's considered a Costco landfill, which would take waste with materials above 50 parts per million. I think there's only 11 of them in the country right now that are permitted, and their rates are significantly higher, maybe 3 times as high for a tipping fee than material less than 50 parts per million.
So GE can save more money by keeping the nasty stuff here.
On a tonnage basis, yes.
There's 2 cost issues, right? Transportation.
There's transportation and disposal, so I think I'm combining those because you get the price. One issue with the Tosca landfills, a lot of them are farther away, plus the one that's close knows that the other facilities are far away, so they know how much they can charge before the price is equivalent, essentially. There's a lot more facilities that can take the non-Tosca waste, so you get better competition. They're closer. It's a lot easier to use trucks. And so the combination of the transportation and disposal is roughly a third, I would say. And that's not factual, but it is much cheaper.
Okay, actually, maybe that's actually a good lead into Rusty River update in terms of that issue, obviously embedded in this broader question. So maybe an update on EAB proceedings and kind of generally where we are with the case and the progress we're likely of. And then Dean can talk about the non-contested submittals and where we're at with those things that are moving forward. So, Tim, are you there?
Sure. I don't think we've had a CCC meeting since the board's decision came in. So the EPA was encouraged, and I know many people around the room have been part of the different petitioners who challenged different aspects of the cleanup plan. But as far as EPA is concerned, we were encouraged that the board agreed with EPA on the extent of remedy issues, which we saw as a very good sign. The board did remand, as everyone knows, remanded back to EPA for further analysis on the issues having to do with this disposal location. And we're in the process now of gathering the information that the board asked us to gather to look at that information the board asked us to get and combine that with the information already in our administrative record to come up with a determination on the best suited alternative for disposing of the waste. Our regional administrator was out here last week, talked with many people about it, and we're working hard on that. And at the same time, EPA is interested in looking for solutions that are consistent with the consent decree, could speed up the cleanup, and would be consistent with, or would be satisfactory to everyone. So we've been trying to organize a mediated discussion with a private third-party mediator with all the petitioners in the city of Pittsfield and the 2 states and GE. And we're in the process of doing that. We think it's worth a shot to see if there's a way to reach that kind of agreement. We don't have any preconceived notion as far as what the parameters of any kind of settlement have to be. We want to make sure it's satisfactory to everyone, consistent with the consent decree, and could speed up the cleanup from the litigation we're in now. So,
First question.
2 questions. In terms of the EAB board throwing it back to EPA, what would they be satisfied with as an outcome? Could the EPA essentially come back and say, after study, our recommendation remains the same for off-site disposal? And what are the points of power in its applications in that you have these 2 related but different agencies staking out a slightly different position? How might that move forward? And I'll leave the other one until you answer that.
okay. The answer to your first question is yes, the agency is able to go back and say, we've looked at all the information, and based on our analysis now, our position is the same. That is a possibility. Then your second question had to do with what are the positions of power, and I'm not sure I follow what you're...
Well, it was trying to better understand. Let us assume that the EPA stated that they've decided, without any new justifications or any new investigation, that their initial findings still stand. Does the EAB have, or any other agency, have the power to, at that point, force the EPA into a different direction than what they've, the decision that they've come to? what's the mechanism of the application of power, if there is any power there?
That's a very good question. I think the EPA, our office would be providing information and proposing an option in response to what the board had said. We were going to take a look at all the information. We will say, based on all this information we've gathered now, plus all the information already in the record, this is the best suited remedy for disposing of waste. And based on what this is, we may get people who want to challenge that decision before the Environmental Appeals Board. And the Environmental Appeals Board's, their process would be similar to what we went through the past year, where if anyone challenges it, then there would be written briefings and we have the option for an oral argument as well. And their decision-making is to tell whether they deny review by the challengers, which happened on some of the issues the last time around, or whether they believe that the region, my office, hasn't adequately supported its decision-making, and then they would remand it, send it back to us like they did last time.
So they have...
They cannot, they don't see it as within their jurisdiction to make a decision on their own, a different decision on their own.
And then the second question had to do with this mediated process that you mentioned. What I've seen in the paper regarding that possibility was notable in one major area for me, and that is it feels like a replay of every other negotiation and mediation in the past, where the only party that was not present were the citizen groups, and would like clarification on that if you have any words to bring.
What Dean and I have envisioned for this round of negotiations is that the mediated discussions would include each of the people who petitioned or challenged our decision last year. It would include Berkshire Environmental Action Team, it would include Jeff Cook, it would include the Housatonic River Initiative, it would include Municipal West River Committee, it would include GE. We also believe it should include the City of Pittsfield and 2 states as well as EPA.
So if you were a citizen group and petitioned, you would be sort of brought into the collection of parties who...
Those are the people we've reached out to ask if they would be interested in participating in this. And we're engaging a private mediator to lend his expertise to how is the best way to get this big of a group to be successful.
Any follow-up, I'll go to Barbara, then me, then G.
Is G going to be required to appear, or is this a totally voluntary mediation?
The GE has expressed interest in participating.
Thank you.
Barbara.
I think I'm next. So, I mean, hearing that and hearing that there's this third-party mediator that you got involved, I'm on the CCC newly, but I don't hear myself as a part of any of the groups that you mentioned. And the dump's going to be 100 yards from my house, and I want to be there. And I know other people that want to be there, and we're pissed off that we're not invited to the table. What do we do?
It's good you let me know. We've had situations with each of our go-arounds with negotiations where to draw the line between the people participating actively and who's not included. And we thought that was a fair placed because in the past we've been criticized for not having enough community input in these situations, and we wanted to do that. But I think there is a balance in terms of looking at where does the number of participants become somewhat unwieldy if you have a certain number of people. And this time we are including more than we have in the past, but you're right, we have not included everybody else who's on the CCC, who's not actively affiliated with one of the organizations that petitioned us.
And either very in this proximity that is so
right. No, I understand. And in the past, we have tried to find ways to make sure that those voices are heard, even if they weren't part of the active negotiating. In the consent decree negotiations we made sure that we had special listening sessions for people who weren't able to participate in the negotiations themselves. And I'm glad you raised it because it's something we will have to address in terms of how do we make sure those people, their voice is heard, even if they're not actively part of the discussion. And I would encourage you also, if you have connections with any of the parties who would be in the room, to make sure they know how you feel as well. But at the same time, we will take back that is a definite point that we have to raise when we're organizing the nuts and bolts of this process.
Just one last very quick thing, and that is, I hear that there was a listening session that happened before I was living where I'm living and a part of this whole movement. And I'm wondering now, as the chess game has evolved and we have now a better vision of what terrain is ahead, that you might open up the possibility of a secondary listening session. And I would be happy to be a part of that in any way possible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Barbara.
Okay, and this is kind of a complicated question, but Tim, in your statement just now, you said that your goals are to be consistent with the CD and meet all criteria and speed up the process, right? Those are your main points?
I think so.
Okay. So my question is, when we started this with the initiation of the consent decree in 1999, this was broken up into two pieces, as everybody knows. It's the first part that has already been done and the rest of river. And the first part was decided again without input from the stakeholders that had been very active up to that point. We were shut out of the negotiations. So we had no input, and then that was basically written in stone with people like the city of Pittsfield and DEP and other official type groups involved, but no input from the citizens. And then the caveat to us at that point, because we were all very upset, was the rest of river has been separated out, and with time going by and technology getting better, we would have the option to look at things and see if we could do the second half better. So here we are, and we've gone round and round. We've talked about adding or trying different technologies, but we're still basically talking about dredge and dump. So I want to know what you mean by consistent with CD. Are you consistent with the old part of the CD where it was decided in its own dredge and dump, or is it going to be consistent with the other half of the CD where we were promised new methods of remediation, no further dumps in Berkshire County? I mean, that was Brian Olson was still here promising us that. And he's been gone, what, 10, 12 years, 15 years? So, and then the other part of what you said, meet all criteria. Well, in some states, the criteria, the standards for what's considered safe keep going down and down and down. I mean, we're told above 50 is bad, but 10 is okay in certain places, and 2 is okay in other places, parts per million. But other states have gone to 1 part per million, half a part per million. California, New Jersey, among others. So what is the criteria? It just feels like for the people who are passionate about this, who've been sitting at this table for so long, when we want something, we're told you can't have it because it's, written in the legalese or whatever. But when, we talk about mediation with GE again, it's like, what do we have left to give up? We've given up so much. So I want to know what this means, consistent with the CD and meet all criteria. That means it's just too wide open for me.
Tim, can you speak to some details underneath each of those kind of criteria?
Yes, definitely, and thanks, Barbara. What I've got is, as far as the criteria we're going on in terms of what are the cleanup criteria for the rest of river, our permit modification that laid out the remedy for the rest of river, that all got endorsed by the Environmental Appeals Board. So those are the standards that are a starting point for any discussions in the mediation.
And Tim, to be clear, those are risk-based standards, both human health and ecological, for the various cleanup, right? So it's not so much for the landfilling question, but for
this is for the extent of where are we going to clean up and how much are we going to clean it up? And as Pat points out, it's risk-based, and it's the reason why they differ in different spots in the consent decree is that the risks associated with someone's home are significantly greater than the risks at an industrial or commercial setting. That's why the risks for residential backyard were significantly different than the risk. The cleanup levels are based on that risk, and those cleanup levels are significantly different for somebody's backyard than they would be for someone who's putting a commercial property in the old General Electric facility. So that's why the standards are different in different parts of the consent decree. And we followed in the permit for the rest of river, we followed a lot of those criteria and we laid them out. All of those were endorsed by the Environmental Appeals Board to the extent they were challenged. So I would say that's the starting point for the criteria for it. As far as what we're looking for going into the mediation, I think people at EPA took a look at the decision we got from the board, and they asked our team, how long is this litigation going to go on for? What's the best case? What's the worst case? And when looking at what the worst case scenario was for the amount of litigation still in front of people, the EPA said, is there a way to speed this up? Can we speed up the cleanup in a way that everybody supports and is consistent with the consent decree? And it's not the consistency with the consent decree. Just as we cannot make a decision that's inconsistent with that permit that has all the decision-making criteria. So that's in terms of the consistency with the consent decree. The permit is part of the consent decree, and it has 9 criteria and other relevant information about how you go about making a decision. And whatever kind of a solution would have to be consistent with that.
Except for all the reopeners that have happened, and there have been reopeners, have all been to the benefit of GE or other commercial entities.
I think I know what you're saying, but I think those are the consent decree modifications. The reopeners are things that are meant to require GE to do more work. And we have used that provision to actually obtain more work from GE than the consent decree required in several instances without having to formally invoke that reopener. But as you're pointing out, the consent decree modifications, I guess I would disagree with you as far as them only being used to benefit private parties. I think we have had 11 or 12 modifications, and some of them have been strictly to streamline things that in a 400-page document, plus a lot of attachments that are even bigger, that there can be inconsistencies. And so the modification was necessary in some instances to address things that had inconsistencies. Other areas we had to do it because a situation came up that nobody had envisioned, and we had to modify the consent decree for that purpose.
Just because of time, I want to take Gene, Tim, and Benno, and then probably just move on just because of more time. So, Gene.
Yeah, my concern, I mean, we're all concerned about the human health, and I'm concerned a little bit more, or not more, but about the health of the critters. But nobody's talking about the economic health of the Berkshires. If we put what I consider another Love Canal and stick it in a village, I think the economic effects of that is a lot more than $250 million that GE's worried about. And I'm not hearing that being important. I'm not hearing that somebody is going to go and talk to these people in Washington who probably never heard of the Berkshires or think it's out in the boonies. You know, somebody's got to tell them we're not talking about dumping these things in the desert. We're talking about the place where people are investing millions of dollars, like Tanglewood and Cranwell, or not Cranwell, whatever they are. And I'm not hearing that that's a concern that's going to Washington.
Yes.
It is definitely a concern that we have made to Washington, to anyone at EPA who hasn't been involved in the past and who didn't already know that. It is one of the concerns, and it's one of the concerns that you and others raised to our new regional administrator, and she will definitely pass it on to Washington. It is one of the.
It's major around here.
And I think those threads of thinking came through in terms of the discussion in all of our arguments about the community acceptance being part of whether the on-site landfilling would be implementable as GE had recommended. So I feel like we have made that point in our legal briefs and in our policy discussions with our leadership, and I understand what you're saying.
Tim, of the 9 criteria, I believe one's community concurrence and one is state concurrence.
No, the 9 criteria don't include specifically designated ones having to do with state or community acceptance, but they're embedded within the criteria and sub-criteria of the 9 criteria.
So in other words, that's what we said, not only is community concurrence maybe embedded, but state concurrence would need to be in there as well.
Absolutely, state concurrence, and also the as the board mentioned, the decision making isn't just the 9 criteria; it's any other relevant information in the record, which we have a lot in our briefs to the board. We had a lot of information about community concerns about different issues.
Tim, Benno, and then Rita, and I do want to go on after Rita. So Tim.
Well, I just want to expand a little bit on what Barbara was talking about too, is that we've been screwed multiple times, the environmental community. And when I look around this table and I look around most of the players today, most of you were not around at the meetings 15, 20 years ago. And so we see a whole new group of people that 15 years ago, we would never have envisioned them around the table. So let's review the history. Let's go back to the consent decree for a second. And when John DeVillers, the head of the EPA, came out to talk to the community and told us, well, don't worry that you're not at the table. We're going to take care of your concerns. And guess what? We had no choice but to believe him. So we believed them. The community believed them. The people in Barber's neighborhood believed them. People all around Berkshire County believed that. And in the end, we found out that he really didn't carry the bucket for our concerns. They were lost in the shuffle of the consent decree and all the other big monkey mucks that were working around everything to try to get their piece of the pie and their money. And so we consider it, you know, I like to call the consent decree a 60-40 proposition. 60% was good, stuff that we argued for many years, and 40% makes your hair stand up on end. Case in point, Hill 78 is one of those things. But I want to go back further in time. I want to go back to about 1994, okay? And we were sitting, not here, but we were sitting in a Lenox building with the head of the EPA, Doug Luckerman, your past predecessor, was there. Brian was there. It was very early on, and Brian was there, Brian Olson, if you know Brian Olson. And at that point, you guys came to us and said, let's mediate. And we believed you. And you said, GE is going to come, and they're going to sit at the table with us, and we're going to hash all this out, and everything is going to be hunky-dory in the end. And what do? We believed you. So we went ahead and started having meetings, monthly, and monthly, and monthly, and monthly. And I forget exactly how long they strung us along, but we were young.
Were you included in those meetings, Tim?
Yes. Yeah, we were part of, well, all there was GE, HRI, and the DEP. I mean, this was the early days, okay? There was nobody else, none of these other groups around it at that point. But, so what happened is, we're sitting there talking to GE and thinking maybe we're making a little progress and making a little progress and making a little progress. And then, you know, I forget how long it was into the mediation. It was either a year and a half, a year, 2 years, could have been 2.5. It's a long time ago for me to remember exactly how long it went on. But we came into the meeting one day that we were promised good results would come from it, and GE wasn't there. And we asked, where's GE? And they said, the hell with this. And they walked out on us. So here we are now, 20 years later, and we're being asked to mediate. And how do we know what we're going to get out of this mediation? You know, a lot of us have been spending our lives working on this thing, and you know, I'm sort of afraid to believe even you guys. I know I don't really believe GE is going to really roll over and really change their positions that much on what's in their briefs and things like this, but you know, you guys have and you've told me personally, actually, that things are going to be better on PCB Street, and
I have. Well, I've told you that?
No, I didn't say you. I said from EPA I've heard that mediation is going to bring us to a better place. And I don't really have a lot of faith in that, and I'm trying to figure out how we as not only an environmental community, but most of us in our groups, a lot of us are impacted. Okay, I own a piece of property that will never get cleaned up, so they just won't clean my property up. That's the way it's going to be, and I have to accept that in this whole thing. But the bottom line is where are we supposed to really, you know, does EPA sign agreements with people and say, we promise we will, you know, and you did that to us once when we
signed an 11-point, we agreed with you on an 11-point plan in 1999, spring of 2000. I was part of that.
That was
we negotiated that. And it was, and it's something that we carried through on every one of those points. And
so how did you carry through on the innovative technology? I know what you're going to say. We have, what is it, Jane? We have proposed using carbon technology. Benno knows about this because Benno bought the first speaker into Berkshire County about this. But so the innovative technology we've tried is to use activated carbon.
no,
in
we,
there.
So Tim, your response.
Before that was a Pac-Man.
Can I answer your question? I think these were questions for me on your concern. Jim and Dean and I worked hard to get EPA as a whole to expand the group who would be part of this mediation to include more than just the states and GE, and also to include the other petitioners. You're one of them. You're part of the process. I can't guarantee the process is going to be successful. That's part of the whole prospect here, is that we don't know whether there is a successful outcome or not. And I have to go into that without knowing. I think everybody at the table has to, as well as anybody who's not at the table, has to know that that's not a possibility. I can't talk to what you did in 1994 because I didn't start on the project till 1998. I can talk about the consent decree. You weren't at the table. I know that when we were trying to finalize the settlement, we came to the Berkshires, came to people like you and said, what are the most important concerns? And we attempted to get those all in the settlement, and in a settlement that addressed comprehensively an awful lot of things. And people were very concerned about starting the work in the half mile as soon as possible because of the high level of contamination. People were very concerned about Allendale School. We got both those things started before the consent decree even got finalized. But I got to say, with the mediation, it's really, I can't guarantee you anything as far as what will come out of it. I want HRI to be there, though.
Let's try to, can you go ahead, and I want to move us on.
We understand that the mediation is a crapshoot. But we've been through 2 crapshoots before, and we're wondering what it really gets the community to even negotiate with General Electric at this point in time and go through the same exercise again. It doesn't bring us a lot of promise. But I want to go back to the promise.
I think Tim's concern and others' skeptical mediation is reasonable given the experience. For what it's worth, as sometimes I mediate cases, it's often people come to mediation because it's the best of all the worst choices. It's not because they think it's going to be great or they're going to get all that they want and they even really want to be there. And so people really often consider mediation as compared to other choices. And sometimes they say our other choice is much better, whether to make public noise, litigate, whatever it is. And I think it's, what's important about mediation is each party gets to decide that for themselves with self-determination about and making that choice. And the problem for citizens, as you all know, is your alternatives aren't great. And that's the incredibly frustrating part for all of you and for any citizen on any Superfund site. You often feel like you're most affected and most often the bystander. And that's a crappy dynamic. I don't know what else to call it. I would say that my sense is EPA is trying to be as inclusive as it can with this new process, as best they can. By the way, I'm not mediating it, so I'm not in vested interest. But I think they're doing their best to try to be as inclusive as they can about it with all the constraints and skepticism that Tim fairly raises. And so I want to not acknowledge that, see if Tim has a final point, and go to Benno and Reed, and then keep us going.
I just want to, this has been twisted around to all mediation. That's only one part of what I was talking about. I was talking about the points that we settled with you guys, our motion to intervene, where you promised certain things. And you have a different idea of what you promised us than what we think you promised us. And, we have Mindy Luber, who was the head of the EPA, on video, saying something different than you guys tell us now. You guys tell us, well, we've done innovative technology because we reviewed a few things out there and we've deemed them to be not worth looking into, which is a really strange way because that's not what we were proposing all along. What we were asking for is some pilot tests. Maybe we can find a new way. If we had started the pilot tests in the year 2000, we would have been done 10 years ago with pilot tests. We might have had an innovative technology. We might have had something to work on, but no, we didn't get there. So we were promised that. We don't feel like that was kept to us. And there's other things on that list. We can go through that list.
Okay.
We wrote down the list, and
Let's bring the list next time to the CCC. I'd like to review them.
Okay, let's
Make that
be in action. Good. All right, Benno, Reed.
Okay, just a couple of points. When, in following up on what Gene Shaggy said, my understanding is that the EAB seem to be indifferent to the various points and arguments that the various other parties who presented arguments to the EAB made, that it seemed that aside from accepting what the EPA had, the case that the EPA laid out for how they'd like to proceed, it seemed that cost effectiveness was a very strong component. And they certainly rejected pretty much everything that any of the other petitioners brought to the table in terms of their motion standard meeting. So we have I'm not sure where the issue of valuing the quality of life and the economic value and the intrinsic nature of the Berkshires as a not only a living entity but as a force that brings people here. I'm not sure where that could play a role in the way that you've described the process going forward. Because it seems that the EAB has essentially disqualified those things as having an important place in the decision-making process. And please correct me if my understanding is incorrect. I'm just looking for little rays of hope in this. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Secondly, the whole process of mediation suggests that there are entities with various positions of power that they're going to be able to trade with other possessors of power in that around the table, so that you come out with an outcome in which people have given up something to get something. And yet I'm not sure, based on things that Tim has said and Gene has said and things that other people have said, not even necessarily this evening, about what position of power the citizens have here at the table in terms of what else we have to give up. Because it seems like we've given up a lot. And that without the EPA firmly at our back, championing the things that are important to us, and as representatives of a government that you'd like to think is working on behalf of the people and the powerless. How far, and I'm asking questions that I know you're not going to be able to answer, on the fly, sitting here. But is the EPA in a position of taking our back, of being there and saying, yes, this is stuff that's not negotiable? The idea of putting a dump, another dump, we should remember to say another dump in a community, and maybe another 3 dumps in a community. This is not negotiable. As representatives of the citizens, your arguments may be fine for the court of law and trying to deal with cost effectiveness and all that stuff, but there are some things that are not negotiable. And as people that have studied this situation and heard the people and listened to what the communities want and need, and you certainly have had ample time to hear representatives from the various towns talk. There are very, very few voices in our community that welcome the idea of these dumps. What is that worth?
So Tim, do you want to answer that or refrain from answering that?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
The first part, in terms of whether the board placed any, it sounded like you were asking whether the board placed any credence to the idea of the effect on the environmental resources or the area of the Berkshires generally.
Economic resources, and environmental resources,
I mean,
and all of the other resources that are less quantifiable
Yeah.
other than balancing out the science or the cost or, how many lunches GE has had with, the head of the EPA.
I did see in their opinion some discussion of the region should provide information on the effects on residences, businesses, environmental resources, and so that indicates that they had some recognition of that, and we plan to follow up on that.
Didn't they reject almost all of the citizen comments? And some of those comments were based on, the value of adding dumps to our region.
And it's not businesses, it's the whole region.
Tim, did the EAB reject outright? Did they acknowledge concerns? That's why I want to keep people in order, that's all. Because I know Gene's expressed concern about the economic impact, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an economic driver in the Berkshires, how can they do that? That's what baffles me.
Yeah. No, I was just pointing out that I can't read to what their intent was. I can read what they said, and what they did say was, they did mention that as part of their reference to things that the region could do to support its arguments.
And to the second point of Benno's question about influence and power in mediation.
Yeah, that I can't speak to it. We're just trying to organize it, and we tried to get a broader group than we had 2.5 years ago. So we were encouraged that people were interested in that, but I can't really say what's going to come up in that discussion and what people's reactions are going to be. I think Pat's general remarks earlier are certainly a lot more eloquent than anything I've said.
This may not be helpful, but again, in multi-party mediations we've been in the past, the power of weaker parties, for lack of better terms, is coalition building. So if NGOs, towns, cities, and states, without mentioning other sites, come together in a powerful way, whatever EPA does or doesn't do, that is powerful. And I've seen other states that begins over time to have impact. I won't mention other states, but they might be close by. And so that's the one power I think.
That coalition, I think, has been formed with the absence of the state, perhaps, who is a weak sister in this particular coalition. But the towns and everybody else have been unanimous in their disinterest in the idea of additional dumps. Do they have to come out and lock hands and chain themselves to each other to express more fully the fact that they're a coalition?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It may, I don't know.
Judy and then Reed.
I have some very specific questions for Tim Conway. First, just kudos to EAB for stepping away from the potential of them being considered the mediators of this process and to maintain their integrity of their body, whether or not I agree with their decisions. It was their decisions specific to this case. I think it was powerful of them during these times to step away from agreeing to be the mediator in this. The facilitator, you earlier spoke that the facilitator is a man, like it has already been determined. Have you come to choose someone?
Yeah, we had worked with a mediator named John Bickerman before 2.5 years ago, and in order to get these organized, we would like to go with him.
I think you will find broad-based consensus to make your outreach to facilitators, first more gender neutral or gender equitable, and that Mr. Bickerman was not, when he came to town, he was not embraced by most. And I would be hard pressed to accept him as a mediator. And why is this not an open process, or at least some input, or know what's going on before you choose the mediator?
We wanted to get things started. We feel like
You don't remember? You don't remember what happened? Okay, we'll talk another time. But you should, you need to choose somebody else. You need to come up with other names and other people far more experienced and more amenable to everybody at the table. I don't think you remember. Observers, during the consent decree period, we always asked for observers to be included in the multiple closed-door sessions, whether it was pre-consent decree or all of the other closed-door sessions that happened throughout the years, and we were always rejected for at least having silent observers, or perhaps a very small amount of time at the end of these closed-door sessions to have observers speak. So again, we'd like to ask for observers during these mediations. Will Audubon be included at the table?
we had not anticipated including any of the parties other than the petitioners and the people we mentioned.
In a process,
Their Audubon didn't petition, is that correct?
amicus.
Amicus brief, and they are a landowner. Okay, and just a EAB and First Circuit Court of Appeals process question. Once the two remands that came back to EPA from the EAB, once we go through this theoretic or potential mediation, which I guess I'll believe it when I see it, that we're sitting at the same table as attorneys Beakey and attorney Klee, and I have doubts that this is ever going to even happen. But once the two remands are satisfied back at the EAB level and the EAB makes their final decision, then the First Circuit Court of Appeals process remains the viable next step?
Yes.
Okay, because in reading the policy manual, it was hard to come up with another case like this in the EAB records.
Oh, yeah.
And it was difficult to ascertain if this like knocks the First Circuit Court of Appeals out, if some of us already missed the First Circuit Court of Appeals deadline. So,
No.
okay, so that's, facilitator is an issue.
Let me go to Reed, and then Tim, if you can be really brief. And I know this is like a seminal issue, so I want to kind of recognize how important it is and also keep us moving.
Just got a quick comment.
No problem. Reed and then Tim.
Okay. So let's talk some real numbers here. 2009, $309 million of tourist revenue in the Berkshires. This is coming from the Massachusetts Office of Travel and Tourism. And then in 2016, wow, $453 million. Now last year, we went up 2.2% to $462 million Okay, now, just some simple math gives us, that's $38.5 million every month, right here. Right? And then that's
What was the middle? You got 2009, I missed the one, and then
2009, and then 2016 was 453 million. This is local businesses, restaurants, buying, this is hotels. And then in 2017, it goes to, up by 2.2% to 462 million. And that's beverage, retail, lodging, also all same source, Massachusetts Office of Travel. And so that is daily. $1,265,753.42, right here in the Berkshires. Now, I know a lot of people are really struggling here, that live here year-round. There are communities, there are people working crazy. I hear several people refer to jobs as the Berkshire Shuffle, where they do a lot of lawn care, and then in the winter they work in restaurants. You know, this Love Canal scenario, which you're describing, is very real. And when we start throwing around numbers that far exceed, you know, I think anybody's paycheck in this room. I'm just talking about the daily, 1 million, right? So, you know, it's when we talk about what we have to give up, what you know, we were saying, you know, here we are, we're going to mediation. What do we give it? I don't have anything. I mean, what do I have to give up? I have a house that I'm going to have to give up. I need the EPA to have my back. But more than my back, I need the EPA to have the backs of my 9-year-old, my 12-year-old, that I moved to this community. And I told, this is going to be our home, this is where we're going to grow up. So you're going to go to high school here. And you're going to probably work summer jobs here. What summer jobs? You got to be kidding. Like they can maybe work over at the PCB dump. Get them a hazmat suit for Christmas? That just sucks. Santa doesn't want that. Yeah, we're laughing. I'm serious, man. And when we talk about, you know, I mean, I need to believe that the EPA has my back and will take a stand, a real stand for the citizens here, the everyday citizens that rely on that money that's coming here that is the tourist revenue. Okay? And you say, you don't know what's going to happen, what's going to come up in mediation. I will tell you one thing that is not going to come up. You will not have anybody who lives anywhere around the Berkshires saying, I welcome this with warm, open arms. There is not a soul here that wants this.
So I'm going to do a time check. So we're pretty far over. I've got 2 other placards up, and I feel as people make important statements, other people may want to respond. So we can keep going, we'll have to cover about the agenda, or we can move on. So I kind of need a direction from the group about how we want to proceed here.
I don't know if there's anything more important than what we're talking about, quite frankly.
Yeah.
That's your guys' call. Tim, you can keep going.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, is all this talk about the EAB not agreeing with the petitioners and, you know, staking out their position, which we appreciate. I mean, it's something, we know it's part of the process, but I just wanted to mention that Region 1's response to most of the people who filed briefs also chewed us to pieces. That's all.
I would like to mention the elephant in the room, which is Scott Pruitt. I would like to say that the EPA right now is under attack. The CCC, we're all well and good here, and all of us, but I really think that some of this push to do something right now about the dumps, which is the only thing GE will come and talk to us about, has to do with expediting something just to check it off of a big giant list in Washington, D.C. And I'm petrified by what's going on there with the EPA, and you guys, you EPA, you people are the best. And you are what we have. And I know you're doing the best you can. And now you not only have Washington, D.C., but you have a new administrator in Boston who is part of that club. And it's a big club. And it doesn't include you guys, and it doesn't include us. So I really do have some misgivings about the entire mediation, negotiation with who and whatever, how it's going to play out. That's all I have to say. That's the elephant in the room here.
I second that. In Boston, too.
So I clearly, in terms of just specifically, I think people have expressed passionately a number of concerns and issues. Tim, in terms of next steps, so just people know, with the petitioners who would be involved in this initial piece today, would they expect to be reached out to in the next period of time? Or do you know yet what the timing is?
I think they've all been reached out to.
Becky?
I'm just curious if there's any flexibility regarding Mass Audubon's involvement, or if that's a legal, legal decision that because we didn't petition.
It is not, it's not illegal. Our judgment wasn't based on a legal decision. It's, we have had other sites, many sites usually limited to responsible parties and the state and EPA. We tried to expand it here to include what we thought was a core group of representative interests, and so that's why we made the judgment call we have. But I'll take note of what you said.
Yeah, if you consider opening it to Mass Audubon, I think we want to stay as engaged as possible and would like a seat at the table, or at least the option to take a seat at the table.
Thanks, Becky. Okay. Thanks all. An important moment, I think, has been said, and tough moment and hard decision to as always on this site. All right, briefly on the stuff that wasn't contested, can you give just a really brief update, and I want to move to target updates.
I can be as brief, as the questions are. And also, while Tim was sharing most of those questions, the only thing I'll say is I did listen to everybody. For whatever position I'm at, one of my jobs is to relay the information that I heard today to the people at Boston, and I will do that. I can't, I will relay the information. That's what my role will be. And I'll relay the passion, because sometimes the passion doesn't always translate when it's relayed either word to mouth or even in the paper. So that's all I can promise, is that's what I will do. So where are we with that? And I can go very briefly if we want to get to other stuff. It's really a summary of what we've talked about before. So what is not contested and what is severable, the baseline monitoring plan that was submitted a while ago. And all I'll say on that is we've had extensive discussion. We received comments from the public. We've had extensive conversations with both the states and with our consultants. We feel these are very important baseline documents, and it has taken a while, and we see some deficiencies, and we'd like to correct them. The floodplain sampling and investigation component, that is an investigation plan for what's called REACH 5A, which is the floodplain component, and it coincides with Pittsfield. 5A ends at the Pittsfield-Lenox town line. And we've had discussions with some of the property owners and with, and we'll have more. And we've decided to break that up into several parts because there's a lot of components to it. So briefly, we've asked to separate it into properties that are owned by, say, residential people or smaller landowners, as opposed to the state-owned properties, to try and expedite some of the sampling on residentially owned properties. So we're working our way through that. And the other thing we're doing is more the characterization of the floodplain. And that will start this spring with some inspections for potential vernal pools. So G's identified up to 85 potential vernal pools. And hopefully over the next 3 or 4 weeks, they will do their first round of investigating those with our oversight. delineate the difference between backwaters, vernal pools, wet areas, channel, just more characterization. And all of those categories feed into different permit cleanup requirements. So it's important to know which box a geographic area is in, if that made sense. And we have constant contact, and G's in contact with Mass Heritage. I always get their name wrong. Natural Heritage and Endangered Species, so they are very well tuned in with the timing and the requirements and reviewed the qualifications, and we're pleased with G's qualifications. Just one more slide on the uncontested submittals. The institutional control plan, call them the fish advisory plans, and the outreach. Again, it was a little more complicated than I thought. We are having back and forth with both Mass DPH and Connecticut DPH. They've got strong opinions on what the signage should be, which is very good.
You go Connecticut.
Both with Mass. And they're just moving along. Everything seems to be moving slowly, but there's just a lot of coordination going on. And then lastly, we're working on our conditional approval letter for the dam maintenance and inspection plans. So we received a lot of comments from the public and from both state agencies. That one seems a little more straightforward. We'll have conditions, and we'll get back to GE on that shortly, hopefully.
So questions, Jane?
Just super quick comment that we haven't been seeing any vernal pool amphibians moving yet.
It's been kind of cold, but I'm hearing maybe 70 degrees this weekend, so we'll see.
As long as it's been raining.
Maybe that'll wake them up.
Saturday, Friday, 39.
Tomorrow? But yeah, we haven't heard anything either.
As documents come out, are you still notifying us?
Yeah, these are all the ones that we anticipate right now unless they do a resubmission. So unfortunately, everything's in our hands to get back to GE with approval letters or require resubmissions. But yes, when another document gets submitted formally by GE, we will let people know.
And Dean, when you actually do your documentation either back for approval or resubmission, do folks get a notice of your stuff back?
I mean, we don't send they all get posted on the webpage and they come out in the monthly document list. I don't announce each time I approve a qualification, but
in the monthly document.
They're in the monthly document list. Yeah, any approval letter will be in the monthly document.
Yeah, I see the Woods Pond Rise Pond inspection monitoring maintenance plan submitted on my birthday last year. I was wondering if there was any more headway. I had asked about getting an air quality monitoring device where I am in the Rising Pond area where the dam is and everything. So just curious if there's
Yeah, I'd say based on what we did in the investigation phase, we didn't see any risks from the air in the floodplains as is. That's not to say we won't monitor it during remediation. We just don't think that's necessary at this time.
Even with the falls from the dam?
Yeah, because the falls from the dam were there. I just don't see that as the most important pathway. I know it's critical to you because you live there, but
yeah,
from a technical point of view, we don't see it.
I thought Attorney Conway promised you.
Well, there was not. I'll spare you. You never turned to me and said, "I promise you." However, you did say, "Yeah, I think something like that could be arranged," and we did have a conversation about it. So I see it up here. So I want to bear you out of a promise, but I would like to further the conversation.
And but you actually put that in writing in comments. Is that right? You're concerned about air monitoring, or was this verbally stated?
I think it was at the last meeting.
It was at the last meeting, and it was at the meeting before.
Two meetings.
Okay.
2 meetings.
Yeah.
So you understand the concern.
I understand the concern. I guess.
I mean, I'm not the only one that lives there. There's all of Rising.
I fully get it. I get it.
Okay, cool.
All right, so I'm going to note that as an action item for EPA to follow up specifically on
again.
If the answer is no, then let's just say no.
I'm saying it's supposed to
EPA will not put in an air monitor. Just say, dude, chill out. I'm not going to put in an air monitor.
Okay.
Then I know.
I just don't. We're not planning on requiring G to put one in. So I guess the answer is no. We just don't think it's technically necessary.
Okay. Would you put in an air, and so when work begins,
yes.
Can I have your promise, thank you, for an air monitor?
You can have mine. I think we committed in the response to comments to do that, so I think it's in writing.
So
I will check that so that you will have have some backup and put it in these notes that.
All right.
Great, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
During the remediation, and I would check that and
Why
keep
wouldn't
that.
you want a comparison? Why wouldn't you
There will
want a
be
comparison?
comparison now from what's going to happen 15 years from now.
Do you do pre-air mon, when you start remediation, before you start remediation as part of that
We
effort?
generally do a pre-remediation baseline sample, close to before remediation starts.
Okay, but wait, we're talking about when you start remediation way up, like
Yeah.
Woods Pond,
Yeah.
you're gonna give me one in Rising, because all that stuff is coming my way, right? This is what we're talking about.
That would be stuff going in, we can talk about that. That would be stuff going in the air 20 miles. And if we have
And that is
monitors,
totally- I mean, if you
let's
talk
think
to
about
doctors-
this. If we got stuff at Woods Pond, monitors surrounding Woods Pond,
Yeah,
and there's no issue in the closest monitor to the work,
yeah,
so you do concentric circles,
yeah.
then we wouldn't envision expanding those concentric circles 30 miles in all directions.
We're not talking about farts here, we're talking about toxic.
I understand what you're saying, but you understand what I'm saying. If it's, quote, safe 5 miles from Woods Pond based on air monitors, how far do we go? Rising Pond, Connecticut, Long Island Sound?
Yeah?
I don't think that's gonna happen. I'll be honest, I don't think that's gonna happen.
Ideally, but I am saying that
But I hear you.
when the new phase of this cleanup happens, I would really appreciate, because there's
Got it.
3 dams, boom, 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 and the dams churn, right?
Well, there's 2 big ones and 4 in between, yeah.
And that churns the water up and atomizes the water. There's another word for it that's better.
So I think
Volatilizes.
this was true of water, not air monitoring, which I know is different, but on other sites, there's often a contingency plan. So if we see nothing here, we stop, but if we see something here, we have to go down X number of miles and monitor again. So there's often a contingency monitoring approach.
Okay.
Kind of like I think you're describing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that, you'll circle back about what the commitment is before and during remediation, just before and during remediation on air monitoring, right? At least generally.
Sure, I can look at what we said and what's happened in the past.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Do people want a short break before we move on to our next topics? Or should we keep going?
Keep going. I only got a couple minutes. It's all going to be questions.
Okay, quick update on removals.
And I can go pretty quickly. We just thought, we have Rest of the River now, and just a lot was based on the review that Pat did. Just an overall summary of the big picture of what was in the consent decree. There were 27 other cleanup actions or operable units, whatever you want to call it. 20 of them are called removal action areas, which I'll talk about shortly. As you know, we completed the half mile and a mile and a half, so that's 2 other actions that were completed. And there's 5 groundwater areas that I know we've only touched on briefly. But that's the whole universe, 28 actions. The 2 river ones are done. Groundwater always goes on, so they don't really finish. 5. So for the 20, I call them mostly soil-based actions, but they also included Silver Lake and Uncomet Brook. So there's a total of 20 in the consent decree. For 19 of them, the remediation's complete. GE's issued a final completion report. We've issued a certificate of completion, and they need to do the long-term monitoring and maintenance. The one that we just issued the certificate of completion for was Uncomet Brook. That was in March. So we issued that, and they are continuing with, and the final completion report spells out their long-term monitoring and maintenance plans. So that was number 19. Go ahead, Nat.
Just, so what does the certificate of completion actually, I guess, legally accomplish?
Okay.
Is it a finality of actions in that area, or if circumstances in the future create a change that calls into question that something has happened, does something reopen?
I will pass that along to my attorney.
Tim, what
I
this
think
is?
the second way you had it is right. So certification of completion means that all the remedial action work that was required in the statement of work or in the work plan has been done, and EPA has certified that the remedial action is complete. And in our consent decree, it also includes that the performance standards have been attained, which is significant. But there are, so if someone has a certification of completion of remedial action like that, then there still is the ability to reopen if new information that wasn't available prior to that certification if new information or previously unknown condition occurs that makes EPA determine that the remedy is no longer protective of human health and environment, then EPA can dictate that GE perform more cleanup of that, or respond to that in whatever way is appropriate.
So let's, I'm just playing a, way outside scenario through my head. If, Tropical Storm Sandy or Hurricane Sandy came ashore and went due north and, blew out, we had 20 inches of rain in 18 hours in the Berkshires, and the first 2 miles of cleanup were blown out. What would happen in kind of response to that from EPA and even determining what the condition was and what needed to be done after that?
Yeah. Good question. So for the first half, let's use the first half mile.
Sure. Yeah.
So GE has a certification of completion of remedial action for that. So we'd have to. So we obviously evaluate what are the risks that are there now that weren't there beforehand, and so we look at it first from the technical standpoint, what can we do, and then look at it from the legal standpoint, is this something that is new information or previously unknown condition, a big storm that causes us to determine that more work was needed and ask GE to perform it. So that's the way it would play out, is we figure out what needs to be done first, as far as what kind of a response needs to happen, and then look to how, whether that's the responsibility of GE under those covenants not to sue and reopen.
Dennis, maybe a follow-up to.
Yeah, it seems to be a serious gray area here it's up to the attorneys, and they're going to have a field day on this one. What if you have a little storm? What if you have a medium storm? What if something just collapses, like the Silver Lake, the capping in Silver Lake, it slides down? Is that up to interpretation of a major impact or not? What kind of warranty do we have?
I know, it's, and that's why I think if the covenants not to sue are different prior to the covenants not to sue, if you have already gotten, if you were the responsible party and you had already gotten the certification of completion of that remedial action, then the covenant not to sue allows you to point to more information as far as you being able to say that this was known information that EPA knew about before it certified completion, so EPA can't come back against us now. And that's what the national policy for covenants not to sue and the statutory language was sort of built on, that there had to be some point at which the agency's responses were more limited legally. And it is, I think it is open to interpretation. We've got those in our consent decree, and they're consistent with the national policy and statutory language having to do with the covenants not to sue and reopen.
Want to cover number 20?
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that one. The 20th one, just in our sequence, is the residential properties that are lawns that are adjacent to rest of the river. Those were completed, substantially completed last year. G's got some punch list items, reseeding, restoration, tree planting, but that is essentially done. They will submit the final completion for it late this year. And then, as I mentioned, all the completion reports have a section that has inspection, monitoring, and maintenance requirements. So those will be ongoing, and they're all spelled out in the completion plan. So without getting into the reopeners too much, GE does have obligations right now to inspect and monitor and maintain the remedy. I'm not even going to pretend to draw where the line is between what that would cover and what a major storm would cover. But they do have inspection, monitoring, and maintenance requirements. And they have to maintain the performance standards.
Do you want more slide?
I think I might have two, but This one is just an overall picture of the area, and I know there's a lot in there, but in case somebody had a question about a certain area, it's just a map that we've been keeping on going, and it's mostly all green. Just one thing I would point out, these are the 4 parcels transferred to PETA. I think there's a question on that that may come up later. The business, or Berkshire, I never remember what it is, Innovative Center is planned on going right here on what's called the 30s. It's high up on the hill in a grassy area. But that's just the general layout of, you know, the area of work that we've worked on. And this is more just factual information for scale. The amount of material that was removed, approximately 300,000 yards for these 20 areas. Real roughly 170,000 went in the on-site landfills. Also in the on-site landfills was a very large amount of building debris from GE's buildings. So the total that went in the on-site landfills, if you count the soil and sediment and the building debris, was 245,000 cubic yards. So the excess, the CD did limit the capacity of the landfills, the consent decree, excuse me, limited it by height and lateral footprint. So everything, once that reached capacity, the rest of the material had to go to off-site licensed landfills or facilities. Some of them needed treatment, and that was about 127,000 yards.
When you say off-site, is that out of state?
Out of, they all happen to be out of state. They don't have to be, but GE selected permitted facilities that were out of state.
I go Judy, Thelma, Dollar.
Dean, was there any attempt over the years when the basements of some of the buildings, I think in the 20s, and a lot of the tunnels were all filled with highly contaminated, a variety of highly contaminated debris and vehicles and building debris and untold barrels that were still down there, and they were filled to the max, and then the demolition happened on top of that. Are there any calculations during that period of cubic yards of contaminated debris before the demolition happened?
Not that I know of. Correct me if I'm wrong, I believe what you're talking about prior to the consent decree, prior to 1999, I think GE did consolidate material, knock down buildings and consolidated it on the facility. I know there's 2 areas that we refer to as building demolition barriers. One is on the 20s parking lot that there is material underneath this parking lot, and PETA or the city needs to maintain that. I don't have any information as to the volume of material or exactly what is under that barrier.
Are there any tunnels that remain under the roads from the plant from one side to the next that are still patent, that are could be, well, most obviously could be preferential pathways for contaminated liquids and oils to go through those tunnels?
Not that I know of, not that are in the groundwater, not that the groundwater would come up into. I think all the tunnels have been abandoned. I think PETA did use a tunnel under Woodlawn Ave for conduits that they wanted to maintain, so they installed some conduits before they were closed off. But that's the extent of what I know.
Thank you.
Could you go back where I saw? I wanted to ask, where are the off-site facilities that were licensed?
Where are the facilities that GE selected, that GE sent the waste to? Okay, they have sent it to a variety of landfills. One of them is called Model City in New York. That is a Tosca landfill. There is one in Belleville, Michigan that I believe they send material to. The non-Tosca landfills, there's one in New York and one in Pennsylvania that they've used. They've proposed there are other facilities that they've used. I think one is in Indiana, and I have to check. I think they used one in Utah and several in Texas. Certain facilities will have, so you say you have a Tosca landfill, it can take PCBs over 50 ppm. Each facility has its own permit, and some of them are restricted from taking certain types of materials. So I know once in a while that GE would have to send it to Alabama, for example, for a special waste. It had PCBs and maybe 5 other things. So it's been a variety of facilities, but those are the ones that I can remember off the top of my head.
And how is this material shipped?
Most of the time, it's shipped by truck, large dump trucks, straight from the GE facility or the work area to the disposal facility. GE has also, as have other people, it's like transshipping. They'll bring it in a truck to a rail facility. There's a few of those. Take it out of the truck, put it in a rail car, say in Worcester or in Albany, and then the rail car will take it to the ultimate destination, which ends up being cost effective if the farther the distance of the facility is. For example, if you want to go to Utah, they have really good rates, tipping fees, but it costs very expensive to truck it there. So it's actually cheaper to bring it to a transfer facility, transfer it to rail cars, and then ship it by rail. I don't think they've direct shipped into rail cars directly from Pittsfield.
So it was, some of it was shipped by rail?
Yes.
From a transfer?
From a transfer facility. I don't believe that they ever direct ship from Pittsfield, you know, the active tracks or a rail spur.
And when this material is stored or to be shipped out, who keeps track to make sure it's being shipped? Is that the GE?
GE does with our oversight.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Valerie.
Yeah, I just, if a mediation ever happens, I hope that the EPA and the parties stress that we already have a precedent of over 127,000 cubic yards of material transported to off-site facilities. There is a precedent for transporting it out of Berkshire County to Tosca landfills.
Both Tosca and non-Tosca.
Tosca and.
For clarify.
I think that's an important point because GE keeps bringing up that Bill 78 is so successful, we should have another one in Berkshire County. Also, Dean, those buildings next to Building 100, I know Sabic, rents out Building 100.
Correct.
What about those other buildings, like with the peeling?
Right, they're not very attractive.
No, they're not.
They're not heated, they're not maintained. The only one that's heated and maintained is, for people in Pittsfield, the bigger building, Building 100. There's buildings called 12X, 12Y in front of that on the East Street side. They are still up, and there's a large building, Building 14, on the north side that is still up. I haven't heard if or when GE is planning on taking those down.
Sabic's not using them.
Sabic is not using those, no.
Are they, is it part of the consent decree?
The consent decree did not require GE to take any buildings down.
Oh.
Jamie.
Super quick question. Model City, is that in Youngstown, New York?
It might be, it's up a little bit north of Buffalo. I think it's called Youngstown.
I just was really interested that Lenox has a lower median income and higher poverty rate than Youngstown.
The benefit of a landfill. Sorry.
My point is that
Strike that from the record.
if you put
No, James Webb was the opposite.
That's the difference between causation and correlation, huh? That wasn't good?
Okay, anything else before we move to our final agenda item? You want to switch over?
You gotta have something on my back.
That's right, I was a little sidetracked. People are taking a tough issue and trying to keep their sense of humor. Appreciate. And Reed has brought a new sense of humor by to the group. It's quite good.
Just coping mechanism. I'm totally scared. I'm scared as hell.
It's a desperately needed coping mechanism, I suspect. So. All right, so that needs to work. All right. See if the magic happens. It happened.
Yeah, I'm good, right?
Yeah. Okay, so what we wanted to do as our final agenda item for tonight is, as you all know, we did a process review. We sent out a draft report. We wanted to go through just generally kind of a quick summary of the report and a few things about it. So one, it is in draft. So if anybody in reading that thing thinks we missed something, got it wrong, wants to add something, whatever that is, people should just email us wherever you want. Did we send it as a PDF or a Word? Okay, and again, if you want it in Word, we'll send it to you if you want to do red line strikeout, and just let us know. If you just want to send us comments via email, that's fine. And what's a reasonable time frame to do that, just in terms of the written document? How long do people need? 2 weeks, a month? What would be useful to you all, time frame wise?
2 weeks?
2 weeks? Is that okay?
I'd like a little longer.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, why don't we say,
A month.
what, yeah, it's a month. What about a month? So what is, whatever
I'll
today
put
is.
one joke if we
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll just send a reminder out, please get us comments by such and such day, which will be a month from today, and we'll just send those reminders. Okay.
And we have it already?
Yes, we emailed it out in PDF. Again, if you want it in Word, we won't send it out there. If you do want it in Word, we'll do a red line, that's fine. Just let us know and we'll send you the Word.
That'd be great. I'd like one on the record.
Jeff? Okay. So Reed and Jeff would like the Word. Anybody else, just let us know. We'll send it. Lauren? Okay. So Jeff, Lauren, Reed,
I'm sorry, I'm confused. The 1 month is for the final version or?
No, for comments.
Submit
So send us comments within 1
So
month.
we're not doing comments tonight?
Yeah, we'll do some verbal comments tonight. We'll walk through it and people should comment now. We'll take that into account. Plus, we just want to give you a chance to respond to the more detailed written document too. So you'd have a month to give comments and then we'll finalize after that. The other thing to say is we intentionally tried to write, I hope this came across, we don't have any recommendations in this. This is us to try to synthesize and reflect back to you all. It's not for us to actually, it's for you all to decide what changes with EPA you all want or don't want in the process. So we're just reflecting back findings and options people suggest us for changes. We're not recommending what you should or shouldn't do. That's up to you all in conversation. One thought to maybe make that simpler, we can do it concurrent with the final comment piece, is it may be useful for us, whoever of you here want to be a smaller group, to take the kind of data, quote unquote, and decide what of those things you think make sense as recommendations to advance. And then we, a smaller group, could kind of work on that among you all. We'll facilitate it, but you'll be the in charge with maybe a member from EPA. And then you could come back to this in September, October, because June's our Connecticut meeting, to put forward the recommendations kind of from a small group on behalf of the big group. And then the big group can discuss it. So that's, before we wrap up tonight, I just want to see if that makes sense as an approach. All right. So I'll try to be pretty quick. We have different findings and some options, and we want to stop at each in case people want to make comments. So we did the last review was done by, I think, Suzanne Ornstein, is that right?
Yes.
In 2006. And then EPA asked us to do a new review in 2018. Jim, do you want to say a few words about the kind of thought about what was the impetus for this?
Sure. I was about to say, when Suzanne came on, people said, or when Suzanne left and then we had you, people said, we don't want this guy. Suzanne was so good. He will never fill it with juice. But anyway, so.
Thank you, Jeff.
But I think
So wait, do they still think that way? Yeah, what's the second part of that, Jeff?
I don't know what that was.
So anyway, I just wanted to take a moment because, I think it's important to do this review every once in a while. And I might say, I don't like putting up with kind of a lot of flowery stuff and bull and so on. There's not a whole lot of that here. So That's a good thing. And I am humbled every time I come to one of these meetings because of people's dedication and knowledge and so on, and I don't need to go on that line either. But, you know, it's good to have one of these reviews periodically to see if we can make what we have better. I know it's not perfect. I think, you know, generally probably people don't think that they have enough of a voice. You know, it is an advisory council, that's the bottom line. But I think we make every effort that we can to take people's concerns and opinions and anything else that comes up here into consideration, and we do the best we can with it. So with that, I think it was time to do this again, and a lot of good stuff is up here, and it's up to you all to, you know, figure out what we need to pursue. And we're open and willing to, you know, do whatever we can to make it better. So I'll just leave it at that.
So again, we're not able to interview every CCC member, but we hopefully captured a range of views and opinions, and again, also your chance to come on the written document. Okay, so we said, what is the value of the CCC to you? So we heard a range of things, but generally people, with a few exceptions, and again, there's some skepticism with this, but I want to say generally people said, look, it allows us to stay informed. It's one place we get the same kind of story. It allows us to engage directly with EPA and state agencies. And it certainly kind of is a public forum that at least through cameras or occasional media press brings some awareness to the site. So I would say across the board, people find some value in the CCC. There's a range of how people view that value. We'll get to that in a second. The second finding, though, is that people feel really frustrated that the CCC has some basic value. It's better to have it than not have it. But in terms of its ability to actually influence and shape decision-making, cleanup, degree of cleanup, speed of cleanup, people are very frustrated. And there's a sense that the information sharing is useful, but the ability to actually change or have impact is exceedingly limited. And not everyone feels that way, but many people feel that way.
I just want to say, gosh, that's how I feel about not being able to go to the mediation. Thank you.
And again, at any point you want to comment, add on to stop as we go, just like we did have at it. So the discussion questions might, I mean, we want to talk a lot about this tonight or just take it up later, is that finding is real. People didn't have a lot of great ideas, because it's the hard one, about what to do about that, other than EPA, you know, be influenced more by us. But, you know, maybe is how can CCC feedback be better incorporated into EPA decisions if people have ideas now? Or what are options to improve the input into EPA's decision making? If there are any thoughts specifically on this, you know, certainly raise them now, and maybe the smaller group can wrestle with these as well, because certainly finding two was, you know, I think strongly felt. So any quick ideas or comments on that?
Well, it's, you know, like, it's an on-off switch that you're asking us to nuance. And I'm not sure what that looks like even, because we were repeatedly told over feels like generations at this point that you know, our input was valued in some immeasurable fashion, but that EPA held essentially all the cards, and they'd listen and try and incorporate what they heard wherever possible or wherever it made sense, but ultimate decision-making power was exclusively and unilaterally held by EPA. So faced with that, it's very hard to sort of get a sense of purpose and more specifically a sense that, you know, at best it's sort of a way of information sharing, but not necessarily decision making.
Jane, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I want GE back in the room, because I don't want to be yelling at EPA, who's our best hope, when I want to be yelling at GE, and I want them to be here to have to listen to all of us be really, really angry with them.
Here, here.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that, well, I really appreciate all the work that you and the EPA is doing for us, and I do recognize that now that I have one of these cards with my name on it, I feel somewhat more emboldened to speak my mind. However, it is very much a child-parent relationship. It's like my kids when they come to me and they say, hey, can I watch TV 30 more minutes? And I say, no. And they say, let me hear, and they say, will you hear what I have to say? And I say, okay, because I'm a good father. And I listen to them. And then they say, what do you think now? And I say, no. Right? I mean, I feel a little bit like that. So if there was a way of the power that I'm told through the form of name cards is elusive to me. So what power do I have? That's my question.
I feel the same way. All the work that you folks do and us coming here all the time, and that can be trumped by one decision in Washington and a decision in Boston to move GE there, and I'll lay you odds it's going to trump everything we've done up to now. That's the way I feel.
Good choice of words, Gene.
It's a waste of time.
Well, I don't know.
Well, not.
We're here.
We have no choice. If we weren't.
I mean, for what it's worth, the dilemma across sites we worked on is precisely this, is that CCCs are better than not having them, but what they can do is often very constrained. And that's both a tension and an incredible frustration, especially for people who've been at this a long time.
What's the situation that's worked better?
I was going to say, what creative input have you received in asking that second question? What are the options to improve CC input?
So a few things for what's worth we've seen on other sites. So some sites, what people use something like this for as essentially a way is to build relationships with people they might not otherwise have, to find common interests, and to do that through information sharing and talking, getting to know each other. And they take that outside of the forum, which is constrained, and they do coalition work, whether that's media, politics, some combination. And there's a site not far from here that an issue for years that CCC has been at around more dredging. And they've been at it for a long time with this statement, and they're now going through a review process, but they were able to eventually get the other towns, the NGOs, the Attorney General's office, and the Governor's office finally engaged all on one page around that issue. And this took years, by the way. And now they're in the throes of that discussion, but there has been a powerful coalition built. Now the coalition building didn't happen at this table in that site, but this relationships formed there allowed them outside of that table to build that coalition. Mm-hmm. So that's the best, most recent example I can think of for what that's worth.
Well, we're a thorn in GE's side, but GE isn't here, so we can't even be a thorn in their side. So, they really do need to be here.
What has happened with that? I mean, it's been many, many months. It's been, I don't know, we've been talking about how to get them back into the room now for a couple of years, and people were going to approach them and find out. I mean, I at times found their presence and their input kind of invaluable, especially for the homeowner work that was being done. I mean, Dick was
engineering questions.
Most of them told it like it was, and I don't care that Rod was bored or wanted to be any place but here. I don't care. Andy was very informative a lot of the time, and they brought information that we wanted to have.
Tim, in your view on the consent decree, my understanding is, but I'm going to put words in your mouth and you can tell me I'm wrong, is that you don't have any legal power to force them to this table.
Jim and I talked to them a couple of 3 years ago, and with all the litigation, they said they believed that they had as long as they were in litigation with us, they wouldn't come back.
What does the consent decree say about their mandatory participation?
I don't think the word mandatory is
this in a consent decree with respect to their participation. There is a paragraph that talks about CCC, and I think I can't remember what it says, but I can find it and send it out to people.
I thought they were mandated to attend the CCC.
To get that. We're going to send out the paragraph.
I'd like to say something on that. This is not a legal thing, but when I was in there, they were required, and it's similar at some other sites where this same dynamic is happening. They're required to support the CCC by providing information, which, a lot of the information we use comes from GE reports. And, that's it, whether they have to be here. I'm not quite sure who ends up paying for the meetings, and Patrick and the facilitation and all that. I believe it's GE. I may be wrong about that, but they certainly are paying for some of it. So they're supporting it in that degree. They're not here, and I think everybody in this room would prefer that they be here. When Tim and I communicated with them, I think people mentioned, Andy and Dick Gates, who were outstanding. They were super technical people. It was like having other deans here who did not get off on all the other tangents. But I think they kind of got tired of taking people's, comments, or I don't know, it wasn't abuse, but just anger, and they felt it was directed at them, and they weren't happy being here. So I think that's a little consideration. I think that's any kind
So as part of a mediation, if there were to be a settlement, there could be process considerations, I assume, in mediation, like one might agree to participate going forward, for instance. Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to say that I've had the opportunity to deal for some of my clients with the people who do GE Environmental. And if we're talking about you'd like to express your anger, but you also want to have some mediation that's going to be effective, you got to think about that. Because the folks who are there now weren't at GE when the contamination was done. They come, they try to do their work technically, and if what they're going to get back is just anger, then they don't want to come. So the problem is that there's nobody there, including the very fine people that you've mentioned, who want to be come and yelled at, because they didn't do it. They're just trying to do their jobs. And the only reason why I raise it is, and I share your skepticism about mediation. Mediation is not a process where you sit and yell at each other if you want to get something done. So I urge you to think about the fact that these are regular people who didn't do it. They've got the job of trying to address the situation, and you want them to be involved so you can express your anger, and at the same time, we're trying to get something going that I believe is the only way we're ever going to get this river anyplace. We're either going to negotiate this, or we're going to be, our children are going to be sitting around this table talking about the litigation is still going on. I cannot believe that we started the CCC in 1999, and so many years have gone by, and yet there's so much left undone. So if you're serious about mediation, then I think that you have to think about how you're going to channel the anger so that you're going to have somebody who's going to be on the other side of this to hear you and to try to address the issues. If what they get in mediation is what some of you now would like to express to them and let your anger out, then I can tell you from my experience that the mediation is going to be very short-lived, and we're going to be right back to where we are today. So they're human beings, and you know that some of them are very good guys, but none of them want to come back to this because of they didn't do it, and they keep getting the anger and the abuse, and they're human beings. And so I asked the question because we had a meeting and I said, geez, I come to these meetings, I don't attend them all, but they're not here, and how in the hell are we ever going to get anywhere? So I took up the discussion, and I called McLaren. And then what came back was, nobody wants to get yelled at anymore. Nobody wants to do it. So we just can't get somebody to want to do it. And the only reason why I raise it is, I'm not saying they're great guys, I'm not saying the company is not, is doing everything it should do, because it's not. I'm just saying, we're serious about mediating, then think about the fact that you're going to have human beings across the table. You want to mediate? Then you have to approach it in a way that the people are going to be interested in coming back. And then the other thing I want to say about this, I'll tell you what scares me. The terrible situation in Washington really scares me, because we have, I'm a Republican. I was a never Trump Republican. I wouldn't give a nickel to another Republican federal, somebody running for elective office until the party stands up to this clown that we have as a president. But we've got an administrator at EPA who can start turning out lights, and so that's a real worry in terms of the time. You also have to think about the fact that who says GE is going to be there? People have to pay attention to the fact that GE is coming apart. So we assume that if we get this thing together in 4 years or whatever years, that GE is going to be there to do it. Well, guess what? All of a sudden we're looking around and I'm hearing about this company coming apart. Where are the resources? So the urgency that I feel about this, and I'm somebody who's going to live in ground zero, but I want it done. The urgency that I feel is we've got a terrible situation in the federal government. We've got a company with an uncertain future. None of us ever thought that would be the case. And we're now talking about mediation. So if we're really talking about mediation, in terms of the mindset that you bring to it, we really got to think about it. Because if they just throw up their hands and say, we're done, and we go back to the appeal board, and how long that takes. And, I went to the hearing.
Just to wrap up just so I get some comments.
Okay, I'm just sorry. I went to the hearing. They were incredibly well prepared. Look how long it took to get the decision. So that's all I'm saying. Sorry for the long speech.
Jane, Fenno, Reed, and Moore.
A couple things. First of all, I have less than no faith in mediation. I think it's going to be the exact same thing when we get together and it delays it for however long before we go back to them suing, because I have no doubt they will sue again. I think it's just a delay. Next of all, we actually get along really well with Ron McLaren. We got along pretty well with Dick Gates. Andy Silver, unfortunately, we caught being in a major deception on our property. So, no, I do not have respect for him. But it's not a matter of, I think you can be really angry with a company without necessarily personal attacks. But I think having them at the table where you can argue back and forth on facts really, really matters. Certainly, we do that with all sorts of different agencies and can still be on perfectly good speaking terms outside the room. I think GE is being disingenuous and evil by not being here and participating. I think that's just rude. And I think in mediation, I don't believe we have any power, and all we can do is be willing to give up essential things to get some non-essential goodies thrown our way.
Benno?
Yeah, Jane wasn't as good as she was. I probably have something to add to it. But other than what Jane has eloquently stated, the mediation process as Tim has pointed out, as those of us who've been in the room actually longer than Jeff Cook, mediation process, or the global mediation as it was called a long time ago, in fact, has only seemed to enrich General Electric by stalling the process. And in fact, if there was a hammer in this room ever, and ideally we all idealize the EPA as being a hammer. That hammer, hasn't ever forcibly come down on the guilty party in this case. And it is the lawyers, Jeff, who have allowed this practice to balloon to the point where point of order, point of stall, point of clarification, point of argument, instead of doing something that's reasonable and right regardless of the cost, should have occurred a long time ago. And it is GE's lawyers that will continue to guide this company as it perhaps may fall apart, which would, some will cry over that, certainly their shareholders will. I wish it weren't so, because another company will simply take its place, whether it's ours or Chinese or someone else. But without this getting into a monologue about corporate behavior, I'll let it go.
Okay, the placard's up, and then I'll try to maybe move through other slides as we get it up.
I was just going to say simply that, as somebody who's new to the room, and has never spoken to anybody who was, GE involved, other than the cold calls I've made to the several corporate offices. I don't want to yell. I understand they're people, and I'm not. I don't want to. I yell and scream at the sky and at the river, but I would like an opportunity to appeal to whatever iota of humanity remains in that corporate suit. And when they're not here, I feel disregarded, and I feel like a number, and it's I do feel like I would appreciate that opportunity. That's it.
Morning.
I agree that the people, the GE staff, and they had to come here, and I agree they probably didn't like it. And I agree that there should be respect on both sides, because we do need them. I don't feel it's fair to EPA staff who are already overworked to have to translate reports from GE. GE should be doing that. And I'm sorry that they don't like coming here and getting yelled at. However, they're getting paid by GE, and that's their job. And I feel that there's a lot of frustration, and we all have to be respectful. But their job is to be a liaison back and forth on how the community is feeling and how the cleanup is going along. They need to be at the table. They're the responsible party, and they should be here. EPA staff should not be doing their work for them. And yes, they're people, and we have to respect that. You know what? The people in this table are people. And there needs to be a two-way respect, and right now there's no GE respect. And I'm sorry if they get yelled at, but it's unfair to everybody here, including EPA staff who come from Boston, that GE is not here.
Audrey.
On this, I've been here 20 years now, and there's very little yelling going on.
through the years. There might have been a few incidents where people got emotional on one particular injury, but I really take exception that all this yelling. Most of the people here, the environmental groups who love the environment and love the river, are here on their own time. Unlike the public agencies and GE, who they're paid to represent the company. That's what they're here for. And I strongly object to the notion that come on, their feelings aren't hurt. Jesus, the reason they don't show up is the mile and a half ended. They don't have any incentive to come back or listen to what the community has to say. They got most of what they wanted, and they see it as done. And this was kind of like the last kind of dregs, Connecticut gets absolutely nothing. It's monitored natural recovery. We all know what that is a euphemism for. We aren't yelling it. They got incredible questions. The things that I heard at this table and the contributions in terms of science and hard questions have been phenomenal. But they don't have an interest in it, and I don't think they particularly take it personally. Dean a few times has taken a few things personally. We try and tell him not to, because we don't mean it that way at all. These are things we care about. It's not personal, it's about the river, and it's about the environment. I do want to add, before we break, an action agenda item for Connecticut.
Okay. Before we close, we'll touch base about the Connecticut meeting coming up too, so make sure we do that before we go. So Valerie, and then I'm going to go through my other slides real quickly, and then we'll talk about kind of next steps.
Yeah, I've been attending probably close to 15 years, and I echo, I think it's a mischaracterization to say that people were yelling at GE. I thought it was a very collegial group, and we disagreed, but people were always respectful. And I remember even having a few times when we had cookies brought in, and we all shared that a few times. And I think we should not forget what Tim said is the reason GE is not here, and that is because they're in litigation. That is the only reason they're not here.
Do you have a quick final comment?
I'm just going to say that I hear what everybody's saying. They're not here. And there's nobody in this room who can make them be here. And in terms of mediation, some of us believe it's the only way. Some of us sit here and have every good reason to be extremely skeptical that it won't work. So then where are we? That's all I'm saying. Where are we? You can say I see it wrong, but I can't make them come. And nobody in this room can make them come. And if you're going to, mediation's voluntary.
So let me just kind of quickly go through the rest of these slides, and we'll make sure we touch base on the Connecticut meeting for June before we leave. So people, finding three was people raised some attendance questions about their, and I think tonight is actually an example of good attendance of the membership. But people raised concern about not more people coming. And I think part of that is more members, part of that is more public, kind of a twofold. And people cited reasons like it's been a very long process, the site's complex, meetings are technical, sense of the influence, we don't have any value, so why come? Because we're not going to change anything. And some people expressed some concern about lack of diversity of viewpoints here and sometimes contentious meetings. So it's back to the point we kind of were covering with GE that was raised to us. Here are some ideas for options for attendance. Again, these are things that we can talk about maybe in a small group and come back to those things that a small group thinks are worth recommending. Related a little bit to that is meeting improvements. So a number of people suggested things to improve meetings. Things like maybe we need to move venues around more because we tend to focus here mostly, and if people that's one thing to look at. What time we hold meetings. What's the appropriate frequency? Should we have more shorter, longer, fewer, whatever? Different formats maybe to do things, subcommittees. There's a number of ideas that people had come up with. Again, all to be considered, so we just wanted to put them out there. Meeting summaries. I think there's a mixed view on the necessary level of detail in meeting summaries. Ours too detailed, not detailed enough. Some people raise concerns about their neutrality, which we've tried to make clear by any comments EPA makes on it. We'll put the red line out to you all, but we can talk about that. So there's probably needs to be some discussion in the small group and back to this group, or about essentially what do you want in those meeting summaries? Do you want them shorter? do you want them as they are? And that's, I think, a discussion to be had. And there were kind of a range of views on that. The one thing people mentioned, and it comes out actually tonight, is they are, kind of written of the substantive piece. They don't necessarily capture the feelings, right? They don't necessarily capture the passion, the emotion. How to do that, I'm not sure, but it's a fair point that they kind of miss that part of the story. Facilitation, again, we're trying to reflect back what we heard, so hopefully this will be fair. That we're generally able to facilitate fine, but people sometimes ask that we reinforce ground rules more, keep things moving faster, stay focused on the specific issue, making sure there's mutual respect. So people made some suggestions for how we could do our job better, and we're very open to feedback on that and improvements, and you all should be the judge of that. Finding 7 was generally people feel pretty good about the technical part of the meetings, the presentations that are given, the amount of data, the sort of really the aptitude of this group to really dive into these details. However, data presentations, which actually came up I think last meeting, thinking about how to kind of present data in different visual formats and different ways that actually are more digestible and maybe tell a story more clearly, were raised, and so there were a number of ideas that came out there. And then on CCC membership, I think people recognize, I think we're actually doing better. We have some new members, which is great. But people thought there were some additional folks that we could think about adding, whether it's more towns, younger people, more Connecticut folks. Again, there's a number of names that we said, especially as you move into Rest of River. If we get action relatively soon, there's any number of groups who maybe are going to become more concerned that haven't been as involved up to this point. And then there were some thoughts about member recruitment, which is how to do that so we get more people when we do an occasional drive, for lack of better terms for it. And then lastly on this issue, people raised a number of good ideas for how to orient new members, because you're kind of, Reed can be the first one to speak to this, you're kind of thrown in, and you don't necessarily get a lot of kind of background history guidance or support to kind of catch up.
That hasn't slowed him down any, by the way.
He's a fast guy. So I think that's a fair concern, that we how we do a better job of orienting people who are coming on board would also probably tie to, new members staying longer, all of those kinds of things.
Can I just quickly comment on that? So totally true. I would love that if there was a Xerox that said, here's some background. One page wouldn't be enough. 5 pages might be just pushing it. So, and because as a CCC member, then it would allow me to have deeper and more meaningful conversations with people that would then be a part of this conversation. And because I am somebody that is out there talking to people, I mean, I'm not running for office or anything, but, I talk to everybody about what's going on after one of these meetings. And I make this bumper sticker, and I raise my hands and yell and scream. So I think it would be great if I knew more, because an educated person is somebody that gets listened to.
It's kind of going along with that, going through the exercise of trying to capitalize what the CCC is for new members would be an interesting project for us all. It would be, won't be easy, won't be quick.
Well, just here's your initiation paper, and here's your white hat, and thank you. There you go.
Good point. I think this one close to last. So people, again, this notion of the site has been going on for so long, and again, it's not like we have hundreds or even tens in attendance necessarily, except occasionally we have. And so people would love some way to have CCC and EPA figure out greater public outreach. And people ask some questions, what's the goal of that? How would you communicate? Would it be better materials? Are there other ways to kind of get people engaged? Should we rebrand the group, et cetera? And what was interesting is people suggested, one idea came out was maybe we need an annual review of the site every year that is the CCC co-sponsors the EPA. It's the July CCC meeting, don't wing it. And you invite the public, you make a much greater effort for outreach. You really focus on folks who are going to know less about the site, and you try to tell the backstory, kind of where things are and where things are heading, and try to engage people at least once a year. So that was one specific idea that came out about the way the CCC could be involved in sort of stronger public engagement. We asked people if we would kind of pick one, we asked each interview if you're going to pick one thing that we could change for the CCC, what would it be? And these were the 5 kind of contenders that came up. Meeting productivity and respectful behavior, and this is not in the order, by the way, a stronger role for citizen influence, improved materials and presentation, greater public outreach, and changing up venue and meeting time. And those were the kind of the things that, some of those are big issues, some of those are probably more, sort of more, implementation issues, but those were the 5 that were suggested.
Citizen influence, a stronger role for, does that mean more influence, having more impact in the community?
That means more influence on the agency or on the cleanup.
Okay.
Okay, so our thought was, and again, whatever you all want to do with this, is to, a small ad hoc committee could sit down with the report, sort through all the kind of ideas, and kind of hone them to what you think are doable, actionable, useful, and come back to the group with, here's our subcommittee's recommendations, what we should do, and then take it up. The whole group could do that, but that would probably take a fair amount of time, and we don't have that many meetings, and there's a lot of substance we usually have to cover. So that was our thought, potentially, was a small ad hoc committee to kind of digest this into a set of recommendations for the full group then to take up. And I don't think it's appropriate for us to do that. It's your group, and so you know better than we do what might make sense. So either that or another implementation idea, anything quick on how we would do that.
Say that again, please.
Yeah, the idea would be like four of you, whatever, would sit down with us, probably one EPA person, because they're part of the deal, and work through all this and say, okay, all these ideas, let's recommend back to the full group 8 things to do. Mm-hmm. And then this group can discuss those 8 things, decide on 7 of them, and then they get implemented.
I'll say something.
Cool. Thank you.
I don't know if I'd be the right person in that subcommittee, but I'm interested in particular the public engagement aspect of the findings. So
As am I.
would volunteer to take a look at that.
And read too.
What's that?
So read.
I'm interested too.
Yeah, I got to read it, Becky, on public engagement in particular. Okay.
So far, we've got younger blood, which is good. It's a good thing.
It's not the person who's
We define younger brain.
The rest of us are nodding. It's all relative. Yeah. But we're nodding off.
Getting past our bedtime. We had our special.
I need my warm milk.
Anybody else? What do you want to do with this? We got 2 folks at least in public engagement.
Charlie in the
I do want to
back.
say public participation, a lot of people, it's very hard for people to come to these meetings. And I don't understand why they aren't just videotaped and put up on the website and YouTube, because then people can come in and see what's going on. I mean, you open it up to a huge audience. People would have been so enriched if we had 10 years of this on video, either on YouTube or on the EPA website.
We do have 10 years of this on video, and we need to link to it.
It's not official.
We have this gentleman that's all doing it.
It's always been going on PCTV, now we have CTST.
I know, but it usually is, because I know HRI used to do it in the early days too, but it's various groups have different pieces where they did, and we could maybe even get some of those people to give some of that up. So when someone wants to know an update of kind of the history behind all this, you can actually see some of it. People can make their own judgments.
And again, that could be a specific recommendation. I wanted to take Charlie out of comments, so I want to get Charlie in.
You started off the discussion by saying you're going to give a month for people to make comments. So I think before you start deciding all of these other things, I think you ought to at least get the comments in so that people can kind of look at what that document was, what was there, and maybe make some suggestions as well. And then I think there's going to be a little more substance that you can go with once you do that. We try to make these decisions tonight, we're all kind of right there. As long as I'm here, I'm going to make it, this will be the public comment.
Go for it. You got the mic.
I want to thank EPA people that have been in this room for so many years. We know that they're on our side. We also know that you're under an awful lot of pressure because of Washington and Miss Dunn and all of the things that are happening that you have no control over and we have no control over. It was very telling that in her whirlwind visit to the Berkshires that that Berkshire Eagle was invited everywhere except our meeting that was at the Audubon. There was no legend, no one from the newspaper there. But all of it, what was in the Eagle? Oh, we're going to negotiate. We got to make this done. Not one comment by the environmental people, because she did not invite people or anybody from the...
Mr. Murphy?
If I could just so I was the one, I did invite the Eagle to come to that meeting. We had spent, I don't know, an hour and a half or something there. I think they figured they already heard. They're certainly free to talk to anybody, and I think anybody here is free to talk to them. Larry Parnas is the guy who covers it.
But Larry said he didn't know that you were meeting with us after that.
Okay, well, I talked to Clarence also, so Clarence is the more local person. He said, is that meeting open? I said, it's open.
Well, I'll take back what I said about the EPA, because I think...
I didn't make the Eagle.
Blaine Murphy. Come on.
My last comment is about Pat. I think you do a great job. Your team has done a great job. I think you were really good tonight in letting a lot of the initial conversation go correctly. You didn't try to step on people. You really let that communication go well, and I applaud you for it.
Tim, you had your...
Yeah, I just want to comment about public participation. We've been trying that route for 25 years now, and there's only so much of the public in Berkshire County that wants to participate. You're never going to get hordes of people coming out. We did TV shows, Jane's did TV shows. We had call into the TV show. You'd be lucky to get one caller during the show. The hordes of people that people think are out there that are interested in this, they're not. And you have to work very hard to try to reach them and try to have an education campaign going on. And we've been doing this for many, many years, and it's a hard thing. And I don't think it's ever going to change. I think it's always going to be the same, and it's very hard for even, let alone the CCC, but it's very hard for anybody to even fathom the idea of what is a PCB in my river, okay, which is the very basic, the basic question. It's very hard for them to understand that. We've put out so many flyers with all of that information on. The EPA used to hand them out. The Department of Public Health used to hand them out. It's just not going to happen. It's to the level that we'd all like to see. It's just that the public is only so interested in this cleanup.
So one thing I'll do, I'll note that I think the word of caution from a wise man who's been at this a long time, and take up Reed and Becky's interest. And the one action I maybe from this is, why don't we talk with you all about how we can maybe get with EPA and talk about some ideas for public engagement. We'll give you 30 days roughly to comment on the document, and we'll send out the word that people ask for. As Charlie said, we'll get that comment in, and then we'll figure out kind of how to proceed from there. We don't have our full CCC meeting until next fall, so we might need to be email kind of progress it on beyond that point, because we do have our Connecticut meeting, which I'll switch to now, which is scheduled for June 20th at the Kent Town Hall.
Pat, you got Dennis?
What's that?
Dennis said this.
Yes, sorry, Dennis.
Before we break up, could we have an update on the Telelectric dam?
Yeah, let me just finish the Connecticut thing.
But I want to say one thing about Pat's presentation. One of the things I saw was work on getting larger font size and less bullets, and I worked really hard on that on mine, if you noticed.
I was thinking that.
And then I see Pat's with 12 bullets on a slide with font 6. And I just want to say that I took your comments very seriously, and I'm trying to go to pictures and graphs, and I don't know what to say. So we do listen, you do have impact, but we got to translate it to others.
There are lessons that go in all directions.
And
then you put the age in, and I did hear that.
Gene, this was really trying just to make you work.
I appreciate that.
All right, so Connecticut, did you...
Well, I'm kind of concerned. I wanted it to be discussed at some point, because, where the Housatonic flows into the Long Island Sound, a few years ago, I think the Army Corps of Engineers, or whatever, dredged 70,000 cubic yards of sediment. and put it on, I think it was at the same beach, Hammonasset Beach, and spread it on the beach. Well, just this past winter, they dredged the same spot, from what I gather, 270,000 cubic yards, and spread it all over Hammonasset Beach and represented it as clean sand. And this is the most popular public beach in Connecticut. And I guess I want to know from Connecticut that how they can represent that all the sediment that's accumulating where the Housatonic meets the Sound can be represented as clean, which they have, and it's been distributed on this beach. It reminds me of Pittsfield, and everyone got all the, and it's happening today, and it's like, here we're all meeting, we talk about the Housatonic, and then they're talking about taking down, like, the dams in Lower Connecticut, Stephen, and it's almost like that the PCBs don't exist. And here, that's all we talk about.
We put that on as an agenda item for.
That's what we want.
Very good. Yep. So for June, we'll.
Quick response.
So, quick response only because it's late, and then we'll have an agenda item for June.
Okay. I don't work on that issue specifically. There are other people in the agency that do. I have been reading the articles about the dredging, and there was one that just came out the other day, and I actually talked with Tracy Ayad about it before I came, in case it came up. My understanding of the issue is that the sediments are tested before they're used, called beneficial reuse of the sediments. My understanding is because they're larger sediments like sands and so forth, the PCBs don't tend to adhere to those as they would if it was fine silts and things like that. So they are tested and deemed to be clean for beneficial reuse on the beach. That's my basic understanding of the issue, but I understand your concern.
Well, I guess my question is, 70,000 was taken out a few years back. There was 270,000 taken out. Where is that sediment coming from that's accumulating?
Yeah, it's all coming down river. It's all erosion and stormwater and everything else. I mean, the river is a dynamic process, but it does move from the upper watershed to the lower watershed.
Okay.
So we'll work with Susan to try to figure out a presentation about where it's coming from, what are the standards, what's the Army Corps' role.
All right.
Okay, totally fair. Okay, Dennis, you want to hear about Telelectric Dam, then Judy, we'll begin to wrap up. So Tom, any update on the Telelectric? Dennis, any specific question you have?
I just heard that Jim was saying there was an update. I couldn't believe it. I still don't believe it, Jim, but what's going on?
Yeah, the update has been shared by Division of Ecological Restoration with Tom Potter. So maybe Tom, I think, is prepared to provide a few words about the dam.
Yeah, I do have something to hand out, but I think I only have 10 handouts, so I don't know what I can do about that. Maybe send it around later.
Rip them in half.
Give us one handout and we can email it out.
Here, I'll pass these around and wherever they go. And I did want to mention, thank you, the trustees will be having an open house. This will be on May 1st, Tuesday at the Lenox Town Hall at 5 p.m. At that open house event, our project partners will be joining us. There'll be tables, they'll be talking about their individual projects that they've been funded by NRD resources for. Telelectric will be there, Alex Hackman will be there from the Department of Ecological Restoration, the folks that wrote this memo. And then we'll be announcing our funding that we perceive will be available for round 4, which we'll move forward with at some point this year.
Pardon me, could you repeat that? I didn't understand you.
So on May 1st, Tuesday, we'll be having an open house. At the open house, our project partners will be joining us to go over to have a table basically available for you to go around and talk to them about the individual projects, let you know what they did and the money that they spent over the course of the years that we did these projects. We will then do a presentation later in the evening announcing what will be our round 4 funding, the resources that we have remaining in our fund to fund additional projects.
You're opening up round 4 on May the 1st?
We're presenting our proposal, yes, for that.
There's extras of these. And Telelectric in particular
Yeah, just quickly on this, I was up here 2 years ago telling you that we went through the MEPA process and that we were stalled in that we would need to do additional sediment research and sampling for the downstream release if there was to be that. The city would be filing that, and we were going to be moving forward. At that point, we had about $1.5 million to complete the project, which was just about what we think we could do it with. What came about in moving forward in 2016 was that we were unsure of the structural integrity of the railroad trestles above and what we would need to do to ensure that if we were to release the water, that they would be supported. And we needed to backtrack and do some investigations. Subsurface investigations were done along with ground penetrating radar of the riverbed to understand more correctly where the bedrock was located and what the trestles were being held up by. We spent a lot of time with our contractors just trying to get access to the railroad through CSX, get the appropriate training for the subcontractors to do the work. We only just went out there this past February to do that work. We don't have a complete report yet. Alex would be happy to join us perhaps at the meeting in the fall to go over those results. But at this point, it's looking kind of promising as far as the riverbed being a lot more shallow than we anticipated, which may mean there's less sediment there for us to remediate. Also being mindful of the amount of money we have, and we're right there as far as what NRD would be able to put forth to be able to continue this project. And this is really a make or break piece of information for us as far as if we go forward or not with the project.
So that report, when is it supposed to be done by?
He hasn't given me a time frame, but it should be soon.
Okay. All right. Any questions? Dennis, any questions?
No, it's great.
With that meeting in Lenox, are you going to have a press release? You're going to issue a press release?
We are. It's actually being drafted this week. So.
And Tom, if you send us that, we'll send it around to the list. Okay, Judy, anything else or all set?
I have a question for Susan about Stevenson Dam.
Okay.
So the press has been exploding over the past couple of weeks that the funding, the DOT funding for Stevenson Dam has been rededicated, and that's going to include sediment disturbance in a big way, and that's what we have been concerned about for many years. EPA, the staffer who got thrown under the bus many years ago, she said that it was too dangerous to adequately sample behind Stevenson Dam. So, I mean, what do you know about what's going on, and how can we make certain that those sediments are properly characterized? That dam is holding back untold tons and tons of very contaminated sediment.
As a follow-up item, I did have a conversation maybe a couple months ago with somebody because it came to my awareness that maybe DOT was starting to move forward with the project again or reconsidering it. And I think I did speak to Tracy Ayat at that time, and I don't want to misquote, but our folks who work on permitting those types of projects or overseeing as concerns DEP permits are very aware of the PCBs and those. I mean, we have submitted comments in the past about concerns about PCBs and the sediment. So I think it's on their radar, but I will follow up and try to get more specific.
And then Derby Dam is also slated for some kind of project at Lake Housatonic. What?
It's a bridge, Derby and Shelton Bridge.
Yeah.
It's a bridge dam.
At Derby Dam.
So what I'd like to do, I think we've actually got some good agenda topics for Connecticut. We've got the beach question, Army Corps dredging, and we've got these dams in Connecticut and what's happening and concerns. So Susan, if we can work with you, maybe we can try to get some folks there who work on those and have a very a detailed conversation in June, along with some other things we have down.
Remember when we used to meet once a month? No, you weren't with us then. We used to meet once a month and go over an incredible amount of information. I don't think I could do that anymore.
All right, thank you all very much. Good meeting. We'll see you all in Connecticut hopefully in June. And again, probably in September, October for our fall of the meeting. And we're doing a tour before the connected meeting, which we'll sort out, so we'll let people know the details. A brief tour before the meeting. Thank you all. If anybody